The actions by the U.S. government were far from business as usual, and exasperated President Hassan Rouhani was quoted by Iranian news agencies as saying afterward, "Another day, another round of sanctions like they were as normal as American Mondays. But this time, the target is more familiar, Zimbabwe," it read. This southern African country with a population of some 17 million is no stranger to a troubled history. For decades, it was under the military coup or military dictatorship, courtesy of Robert Mugabe, who was a former freedom fighter. Sad to say, a narration like this one has, unfortunately, become the commonality. Mugabe, who had been in power for some 30 years, even tried to hand it over to his wife by the time he was all supposed to be gone. He was removed in a coup in 2017, with succession passing to his vice president, and his wife would have never become president, only the face would change. As it stands, to say Zimbabwe has its work cut out for it, in every sense, to simply outlive American sanctions would be an understatement. And so for years, sanctions have been the single most modern-day object Zimbabwe, most manifestly meant for its ruling political class. Washington accuses the ruling party and its leader, the ZANU PF, of corruption, political repression, and just a dozen other behaviors that are the norm for the typical autocracy. Opposition figures had been quieted through various means, and tales that surrounded rigged elections continued to stay in power around it. Whatever the U.S. tried to do, the political landscape of Zimbabwe stands indifferent to the end consonant. It was as though the United States had given itself over to fall into the old, almost adage trappings of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. This time, with a somewhat surprising change in approach emerging, the United States dialed down its sanctions strategy to adopt the precision strike approach. We are no longer casually targeting large swaths of the entire country, but rather pinpointing the top echelons of power, turning many innocent people among those that had been unfairly caught in the crossfire. The latest wave of sanctions focuses on a mere 11 people and 3 companies in Zimbabwe. Most of these people were already at the blacklist, including the incumbent president of Zimbabwe, Emmerson Mnangagwa, who took over from Mugabe. The Mnangagwa government was labeled by the U.S. Treasury as making huge strides in political repression and vast corruption. Then there is the ring of the bell on the Zimbabwean leader for charges he provides refuge for gold and diamond smugglers, and for bribe-taking charges also on furthering smuggling of minerals from Zimbabwe. He is accused of the abuse of state resources and corrupt dealings in the awarding of government tenders. Others were several top government officials, with the accusation added of political repression, to find a place on the list of one of the country vice presidents and the defense minister. The list included shady top businessmen and their enmeshed companies, and a number of tainted police officials. This category is a carefully contrived list focusing on the particular sole actor and entities. It is rather surprising, but actually, instead of imposing new sanctions, the U.S. has, in fact, lifted a lot more than it has imposed. In Zimbabwe alone, dozens of companies and individuals have received relief, which at least brings a glimpse of hope to hundreds of people within the country. This is to correct the impression that the embargoes were on the people of Zimbabwe, said Wally Adamo, Deputy Secretary from the U.S. Treasury. The shift of approach is a departure from the previous stance where ordinary citizens reeled from the pain of the sanctions as they were left to bear the cost of crimes due to political overlords. Unjust as it was, they should never have been saddled with that burden placed upon them. But now at least this egregious mistake has been allowed for innocence when it comes to the people in Zimbabwe by the American government. New remedy for the people in Zimbabwe. However, Zimbabwe's government believes the victory been proclaimed is bittersweet. But the president and his wife will still have to face the music. A lot of common folk finally get to skip paying the bill for their leaders' deeds. If the U.S. keeps on this new, less mad course, then great. Another small step to justice.